When I was 18 years old, I worked the overnight shift at a gas station on the edge of town. The previous owner had never allowed women to work overnight. I guess he thought it was unsafe. But I had always wanted those hours. When a new owner took over, he didn't see a problem with it. So I finally got the night shift. Most nights, I was the only person in the store. But on this particular night, a guy from the day shift named Scott was there doing a freezer reset. He was inside the walk-in freezer, completely reworking the shelving. A little while later, a truck driver walked into the store. The moment I saw him, something felt off. You ever get that feeling about someone? Like they're just slightly out of place? Slightly out of sync with everything around them? That's how this guy felt. Nothing obvious was wrong, but something about him made me uneasy. While I was ringing him up, he casually mentioned that he planned to sleep overnight in his truck. He pointed outside. I looked through the window and saw his truck parked across the entire employee parking area behind the station. I explained that he couldn't stay parked there overnight. We already had 2 trucks parked behind the gas station, and that was the most space we could allow. He shook his head and sucked in his bottom lip like he was annoyed. Then he said, "I'm already parked where I'm sleeping tonight." He pointed toward his truck again. I told him I was sorry, but he couldn't stay in the employee lot. Workers arrived early in the morning, around 5 a.m., and they needed those spaces. He stared at me for a moment, then he said, "Too bad. What are you going to do to stop me?" Then he stepped away from the register. Slowly, he walked toward the end of the counter. Before I realized what he was doing, he walked around the counter and came behind it. He walked right up to me, backing me against the cigarette shelves. Then he leaned in slightly and said, "What are you going to do now?" I froze. Right then, Scott walked out from the back room. He was holding one of the long, metal shelving rods from the freezer. He stopped when he saw us and shouted, "Hey, we got a problem here." The truck driver immediately stepped back. He shrugged like nothing had happened, walked around the counter, and headed out the front door. A few seconds later, we watched him climb into his truck and drive away. I was pretty shaken up after that. Scott called our manager and asked if we should contact the police, but she said no. Her exact words were that the man didn't take anything, and no one was hurt. So there was no reason to call them. That happened more than 20 years ago, and it still gives me chills when I think about it, because if Scott hadn't walked out when he did, I'm pretty sure that man would have hurt me. So this story isn't exactly scary, but the thought of it happening to anyone is deeply unsettling. Just as a heads up, it involves something pretty disturbing. When I was 19, I got my first job working at a pet store. I was extremely shy back then and struggled with social anxiety. But working around people who constantly talked about animals slowly helped me come out of my shell. Most conversations were easy. People loved talking about their pets. One night, around 8:30, about 20 minutes before closing, someone walked into the store. The person looked male, but they were dressed in very feminine clothing. I didn't really think much about it. People can dress however they want. At the time, I was standing near the ferret enclosure, making sure they had food and water. The person walked over and started talking to me about the ferrets. We chatted for a few minutes about how cute they are and how sweet they can be. They mentioned they used to have ferrets when they were younger. The conversation felt completely normal. After a few minutes, they asked, "Do you want to see pictures of my babies?" Of course, I said yes. I still thought we were talking about ferrets. I mean, who wouldn't want to see pictures of baby ferrets? They reached into their bag and pulled out a scrapbook. Then they placed it on top of the ferret cage. They opened the first page. The picture showed something small and pink, lying on a paper towel. At first, I honestly couldn't tell what I was looking at. It just looked like some strange close-up photo of something I couldn't identify. But after a few seconds, I started to understand what the image actually was. The photos weren't animals. They were pictures of very small, unborn babies. Each one was placed on what looked like a kitchen table. The moment I realized what I was looking at, my stomach completely dropped. Meanwhile, this person calmly kept flipping through the scrapbook. Page after page, photo after photo. They talked about each one like they were explaining family pictures. They described how each child had passed away. At that point, I was completely frozen. I didn't say anything. I didn't react. I just stood there with that automatic retail worker smile on my face. While my brain tried to process what was happening, inside I felt like I was about to throw up. They kept turning the pages, continuing to talk about the photos. But honestly, I don't even remember most of what they said. My mind had basically shut down. Eventually, they reached the last page. They closed the scrapbook, said a few more things, then casually walked out of the store, like nothing unusual had happened. The second they stepped outside, I rushed over and locked the door behind them. That night, it was only me and my manager working. He had been in the back, restocking shelves, so I had been alone at the front of the store the entire time. I started walking toward the bathroom because I seriously thought I was going to be sick. My manager saw me and immediately asked what was wrong. Apparently, I looked completely pale. I tried explaining what had just happened while trying not to panic. After I described the person, he told me that if I ever saw them again, I should immediately tell him, or another employee, so he could call the police if necessary. Luckily, that person never came back. I'm 22 years old now, and those images are still burned into my memory. You could try to tell me the whole thing was some kind of sick prank. But honestly, I can't imagine why anyone would do something like that. It wasn't even close to Halloween or anything. I live in a pretty rough town, so I'm used to dealing with strange people and weird situations. But that experience was something I never expected to happen during a normal shift at a pet store. I don't work there anymore. The store actually closed down in January of 2019. And honestly, I'm not upset about that at all. For a bit of context, I work at a gas station in the backwoods of Tennessee, and this is where this happened. Last night when I clocked in at 8, the store was completely dead. I figured it was going to be an easy shift. The road our station sits on used to be the main road through the area. But about 10 years ago, a new freeway was built nearby. After that, almost every business along this road packed up and left. Most of the buildings were abandoned. Because of that, this stretch of road is now lined with empty businesses, and a lot of local drug users and other shady people tend to hang around them. Around 11 that night, I only had about an hour left in my shift. I figured I should probably do at least a little work instead of just sitting around. I'm 18 and I usually work this shift alone. Honestly, it's pretty nice. As long as I finish my tasks before the end of the night, I can pretty much do whatever I want. While walking around the store, I noticed we were almost completely out of BBQ chips. That meant I'd have to go down to the storage area to grab more. For some reason, the storage room in this gas station is located in the basement. I've always hated going down there. The place is old, poorly lit, and it just gives off a really uncomfortable feeling. Honestly, I have no idea why the owner decided to store everything down there instead of somewhere upstairs. I started walking down the basement stairs. I got about halfway down, when suddenly I heard something fall somewhere across the room. Right after that, I heard footsteps. They were moving in my direction. I didn't wait to see what it was. I sprinted back up the stairs as fast as I could. Then I slammed the basement door shut behind me and locked it immediately. My heart was racing. Once I got back upstairs, I ran behind the counter to the store computer so I could check the security cameras. I switched to the camera that points into the basement, and that's when I saw him. There was a man standing down there, just standing there, looking straight up into the camera and smiling. There was something about the look in his eyes that honestly gave me chills. It wasn't the kind of smile someone would have after getting caught somewhere they shouldn't be. What made it even stranger was that he didn't look like the usual people who hang around the abandoned buildings nearby. He was clean-shaven and dressed in normal clothes, jeans, a button-up shirt. Honestly, if that guy had walked into the store like a normal customer, I probably wouldn't have thought anything about it. But seeing him standing in the basement, staring directly into the camera, smiling like that, it shook me to my core. I immediately called the store owner. At first he sounded annoyed that I was calling him in the middle of the night, but once he heard how shaken I was, his tone changed quickly. He told me he'd be there in about 15 minutes. Then he told me to lock the front door and make sure the guy didn't leave. I asked if I should call the police. For some reason, he told me not to do that yet. So I locked the front entrance to the gas station and went back to watching the security camera. The man was still there, still smiling, still staring up at the camera, for about 3 minutes. Nothing happened. He just stood there looking up at me through the screen. Then suddenly, he stepped out of view of the camera. My boss showed up shortly after that. When I opened the door, I noticed he had brought a shotgun with him. He didn't waste any time. He immediately walked over to the basement door. I followed him down, mostly because I felt a lot safer knowing I wasn't alone anymore. But when we reached the basement, it was completely empty. There was no sign of the man anywhere. No open doors, no broken windows, nothing. My boss eventually shrugged it off. He suggested that maybe I had been tired and imagined seeing someone on the camera. But I know what I saw, and honestly, it makes me nervous because I'm supposed to clock back in for another shift in just a few hours. And I really don't want to go back down into that basement again. Sorry if this sounds like rambling. I just needed to get this off my chest. Because honestly, it scared me more than anything that's ever happened to me before.